Let us continue our discussion of Zugos, the magical world of Zugos. Yeah, so we're talking about consuming things in doubles, in pairs, invites shadim to imperil an individual. So we're up to the fourth line on DAF Kuf Yud Amud Aleph. Tanu Rabbanan Shoyse Kiflayim Damo Birosha. That if a person drinks a pair of cups of wine, his blood is on his head, meaning he's putting his life in his own hands and he's doing something improper. Amar of Yehuda, Emosai Bizman Shelo Ra'a Pnei Hashuk, Aval Ra'a Pnei Hashuk HaRishus Biyado. Rav Yehuda says that's only true if he hasn't interrupted the 2 cups of wine by going out into the shuk in between each cup. But if he does that, so he's created a break between the 2 cups and he's not inviting shadim. Amar Ravashi, Chazina le Rav Chananya bar Bibi da akol kasa havanofik v'chazia peshuka. And he says, I noticed that Rav Chananya, when he would drink multiple cups of wine, he would always make a point of going and walking outside to the market outside of his house, in between each cup as an extra precaution. V'lo amran elalot seis l'derech aval bevei solo. And then the Gemara has a further leniency, and it says that the only time that you have to worry about zugos in general, when it comes to drinking 2 cups of wine, is if right after you drink you plan to go on the road. You plan to go on and take a trip. But if you stay at home, then there's no problem. The shadim are not going to bother you in your house. Amar Rabbi Zera v'lishan kalatzeis l'derech dami. Rabbi Zera says going to sleep after drinking is tantamount to going on the road, because in both cases you're placing yourself in a more vulnerable situation. Both when you're out on the road, where shadim are more prevalent, and when you go to sleep and you're no longer in control. Amar Rav Papa v'latzeis l'beis hakisei kilatzeis l'derech dami. And Rav Papa adds that going into the privy in the back, in the field, is also a place where you're making yourself more vulnerable to shadim, because shadim like to hang out there, and therefore you shouldn't do that either. Uvevei solo. So now the Gemara says, you mean to tell me that as long as you stay at home, there's no problem in drinking zugos? V'harava mani keshure. But wait a minute, we know the story that Rava, every time he would drink wine, he would make a tally. You know, when you drink a lot of wine, it's hard to keep count. So what Rava used to do is that he would count the beams of his ceiling, the ceiling beams, and say, okay, cup number 1, beam number 1. Then he would point to beam number 2 when he had the second cup, and beam number 3, because he wanted to make sure that he always drank an odd number of cups of wine. So you see that he was worried about zugos even though he stayed at home. That furthermore, Abaya had an adopted mother he was very close with, and whenever he would drink a cup of wine, his mother would always be there holding 2 cups in her hand to make sure that if her son ever wanted more wine, he would drink 2 more cups instead of just 1 more cup to avoid the problem of zugos. Here too, you see that you have to worry about it even when you're staying at home. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak ki habashasi trei kasi man kelei sham echad kasa and chad kasa man kelei trei kasi b'trei yadei. And furthermore, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak had an attendant, and whenever he would drink 2 cups of wine, his attendant was always standing there with the 3rd cup, and if he was drinking 2 cups of wine, his attendant was always there with the 3rd cup. So you see that there's this kapeda, there's this concern of zugos, even when you remain at home. So the Gemara answer is Adam Chashav Shiny. The difference is if you're an Adam Chashav, if you're an important person, the shadim will go the extra mile to inflict injury upon you, even though normally with an average person, they're not going to bother you when you stay in the confines of your own home. But if you're an Adam Chashuv, they're going to try and nail you. And this is also a popular Jewish theology, which is the bigger they are, the more holy the individual, the more the forces of Tumah or of evil try to bring that person down. Okay, Omar Ula, Asara Kosos, Ein Bahem Mishum Zugos. Now the next piece of Gemara is an interesting discussion having to do with the diminution of the power of shadim that takes place over the generations. This way the Rashbam understands the Gemara. As I mentioned to you yesterday, shadim are no longer prevalent in the world today, and there seems, by this depiction in the Gemara, to have been a gradual descent in the power of shadim over the course of the period of the Amoraim, such that, as we'll see, the shadim will no longer be effective the more zugos that you have. one zug is clearly detrimental because it's clearly the number 2. But what about several multiples of 2? So as we'll see, the more multiples of 2 that you have, the weaker the power of the Shadim is. So therefore, Ula says that if you have 10 cups of wine, that's so many multiples of 2 that it's no longer discernible that there's a 2 factor involved, and therefore you no longer have to worry about Shadim. You can, if you end up, you don't have to worry. You don't have to worry about, in that case, you don't have to worry about anything after 10 cups. But in other words, you don't have to worry about drinking an 11th cup because you don't have to worry about zugos at that point. But ula l'taime da amar ula v'amrila b'masnisa tana asarakosos tiknu chachamim b'veisa avel. Now ula is consistent because he holds that the rabbis instituted the practice of drinking 10 cups of wine over the course of Shiva. Now, this is a Gemara in Moed Katan, if I'm not mistaken, that talks about that the rabbis had advocated that when you help out a person during Shiva, you should offer him wine to drink. And Ula had suggested 10 cups of wine over the, I think it's over the course of Shiva. I don't think it's in one sitting.
Actually, it says here 3 cups for the appetizer with the meal, 3 cups.
Oh, okay, so then maybe it is at one long protracted meal. And the reason for that being is to help take off the bereavement, to help alleviate him of some of the sharpness of the bereavement. And so the Gemara says, V'yisal gadaita chasara kosos yesh b'hem mishum zugos heichi kaimi rabbanu v'tiknu milsa da'asili dei sakana. He says, if you were to entertain that 10 is a problem of zugos, how could the Chachamim institute a practice of zugos which is detrimental harmful to the person? It's like we had asked yesterday, how could the Rabbanan institute 4 kosos for the Seder when 4 is detrimental? So the same thing here. So you have to conclude that 10 no longer poses the threat of zugos. Aval tamanya yesh ba mishum zugos. But 8 is already a more discernible multiple of 2, and therefore it does present the problem. If you have 8 cups of wine, you should make sure you drink a 9th. Rav Chizda v'Rabba bar Rav Huna da'amri t'Ravayu shalom l'toiva mitztaref l'ra'a lo mitztaref aval shisa yesh b'hem mishum zugos. So they come in a later generation, and therefore they say that no. In Ula's time, 8 was a problem, but in our generation, 6 is a problem, but 7 is no longer a problem. And the rationale is if you take a look at the last line of Birkas Kohanim, Yisa Hashem panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. There are 7 words in that verse, and the 7th word is shalom. So once you have the 7th, number 7, which stands for shalom, nothing that comes after 7 can ever be conjoined to that set of 7 to be harmful. Because shalom sort of creates that barrier of peace, of protection, to protect anyone from being harmed by zugos after or higher than the number 7. Okay, so Rabbi v'Rav Yosef Darmit Ravayu v'chuneka l'tova mitzaref l'rolo mitzaref v'valarba yesh b'hem mishum zugos. Then they come next. The Rabbi and Rav Yosef come in the next generation, and they say that there's been a further erosion of the power of Shadim to the point where you can look at the second pasuk of Birkas Kohanim, which is Ya'er Hashem panav elecha v'chuneka, which is 5 words. And the 5th word is v'chuneka, may he show favor, or may he show you favor, and that is also a protective word which is represented by the number 5, and therefore anything that comes after 5 is not going to pose a problem of zugos. But 4 is a problem. So 4 cups at a time would present a problem. And Abaye v'Rava de Amri Teravayu v'yishmerecha l'toiva mitzaref l'ra'a lo mitzaref. And Abaye and Rava say that look at the first pasuk of Birkas Kohanim. We come at a later generation, and therefore Yivarechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha. The Yishmerecha is number 3. Hashem will protect you. Anything beyond 3 is not a problem of zugos. So the question then is, why did we ask the question yesterday about why did the rabbis institute 4 kosos if 4 kosos doesn't pose a problem of zugos? So it seemed to me, although the Rashbam gives a different answer, but it would seem to me that the answer is very simple. The question was, how could the rabbis institute it originally at a time when 4 did pose a problem of zugos? Here we're dealing with a historical period where the Shadim's power has diminished, and that's why there's no longer a concern with 4, but originally there was. Now, va'az the Rava l'taime, de Rava afkinu l'Rabbanan bi'arba kosos, and Rava is consistent because Rava once escorted the rabbis out of his home after he had only given them 4 cups to drink. And Afal gav de Itzak Rava, and so you see that Rava held that 4 cups is not a problem of zugos. And Afalgav the Itzik Rava Bar Levoy lo chash la lamilsa da amar hu mishum da osman bepir kahava. What about the fact that one of his students, Rava Bar Levoy, was injured by Shadim? Rava concluded that his injury from Shadim was not a result of drinking 4 cups, but rather was because Rava Bar Levoy had a habit of challenging and questioning his teacher Rava while he was giving shir publicly. And because Rava felt the humiliation of having to defend himself and being challenged by this very sharp Talmud, that's why Rava reasoned that he was punished from heaven. Now I should just point out, or punished by Shadim, I should point out that when we say that a person is injured by Shadim, what does that really mean? It could manifest itself in a number of ways, but from a halachic standpoint, Chazal, in Hilchas Shabbos, we talk about someone who is being pursued by a shade or being injured by a shade is someone really who has a bout of mental illness or temporary insanity. The understanding that our rabbis have is that if a person has a fit of insanity, it's really because he's possessed by a shade or is being hounded by a shade. So that's really what it means to be itzak, to be damaged. It could be temporary, it could be permanent, and also, even if it's temporary, it could be like the shade will cause you to do erratic things, which will actually cause you to injure yourself, like run off a cliff or something like that. And a ruach shtus is a similar idea. Okay, now Amar Rav Yosef, Amar li Yosef Sheda. So Rav Yosef says, I had a friend among the Shedim, his name was Yosef also. You know, we shared the same name, so I guess they used to schmooze with each other. So Yosef the Shade used to tell me as follows: Ashmodoi Malka the Sheda Memunahu al Kulu Zugi, Umalka lo ikri mazik. The Ashmodoi told me, you really don't have to worry about Zugos anymore. You know why? Because the Shade who's in charge of causing damage as a result of a person consuming Zugos is the king of all Shadim, who's Ashmodoi. Now Ashmodoi we know about from the stories in Gittin, about how he temporarily kidnapped Shlomo HaMelech and replaced him masquerading as King Solomon. So, that'll be a discussion when we get to that Gemara. But in any event, because he's the king of Shadim, he doesn't want to be known as a ruffian or as a thug who's going to injure people. And therefore, since he's in charge of injuring people as a result of Zugos, you no longer have to worry about injury coming from Zugos. But Ika da Amri lo lahai gisa, Adarabba Malka Raschanahu Maida Boyovich Amelach Poretz Geder Lasos Lo Derech Ve'ein Mochin Biyado. Others learned just the opposite, that once Rav Yosef discovered that Ashmodoi was in charge of Zugos, he said there's even more of a reason to fear injury from Zugos, because since Ashmodoi is the king, and he's a hot-headed king, a king can do whatever he pleases. As we know, the halacha is that a king has a right, if he sees a pathway that is available to him, and the shortest path to get to where he wants to go is through someone's field, a king has a right of confiscation of eminent domain to pave a pathway through someone's field and do whatever he wants with someone else's property. So therefore, the fact that Ashmodoi is the king only makes him more aggressive in his ability to injure others. Amar Rav Papa, Amar li Yosef Sheda, Betrei Katlinan, Arba lo Katlinan. Rav Papa says that in my conversations with Yosef the Shade, he informed me that if a person drinks 2, which is a much more blatant invitation to Shadim, then a person can suffer fatal injury. But if he drinks 4, the injury will not be fatal. Bi'arba mazkinan, when you drink 4, you'll get damaged, but you won't get killed. Betray bein b'shogeg bein b'mezid, bi'arba b'mezid in b'shogeg lo. And furthermore, if you drink 2 cups, then it doesn't matter whether it was done intentionally or unintentionally, you'll get injured by Shadim. But if you drink 4, you're only in peril if you do it intentionally. But if it was done inadvertently, then you're okay. V'i ishtali v'ikri v'nafak ma'ita kante. So now the Gemara asks an interesting question. What if you've drunk your cups of wine and you're on the road and you realize, oy vey, I had 4 cups. I didn't have the 5 or the 3 that I thought. I drank an extra cup. What should you do to save yourself from injury from Shadim? Linkot zakva diyade diyamina biyada desmola, v'zakva desmola biyada diyamina v'nema hachi. You should grasp your left thumb in your right hand and your right thumb in your left hand, like this. Okay? This is some kind of incantational device. Don't ask me how it works, I don't know. And you should say the following incantation. You should say, Atun va'ana hatlasa. You and me makes 3. Now, what's the you and me? I think, although I'm not 100% sure, that you and me means you, the shade, the Ribono Shel Olam, and me, but all 3 of us together, and that makes 3. And because we're 3, that means that we're an odd number, and we don't have to. And there's no harm that you can inflict because there's no zugos here. The isha. Now, so if someone has another explanation, please let me know. The isha miyale da amar atun va'ana ha'arba. Now, let's say you hear a voice responding to you. Then you know you're in danger. Now, the Rashbam says that if you hear a voice responding to you, that voice could either be the shad speaking, or it could even be a guy on the street who's just a nudnik, and he hears you saying, "Hey, there's 3 of us," and he says, "Oh no, you forgot about me. Here I am, and we're 4." So he thought he was trying to be helpful and tell you how many people are in the crowd, but he's created now a new problem of zugo. So then neimolei atun va'ana hachamsha. So then you should say, "Oh no, but." You, all you guys, plus me makes 5. Now, even though it's not, but it's an incantational device to deflect the idea of an even number. V'ishamile da'amar atun va'ana hashisa, nemale atun va'ana hashiva. And if you hear another voice saying, "Hey, that there's 6 of us," after you say, "But there's 5 of us," you should say, "No, plus me, that makes 7. So 1 second. Hava uvda admeya v'chad upakashida. There was once a Maisa that there were 100, and it's happened up till 101, where a guy kept upping the ante. He went from 7 to 9 to 11 to 13, all the way up to 101. And when he got to 101, the shade burst into smithereens, and he was saved. So someone told me from the art scroll that the Ben Yehoyada says that because Gavriel, I think, is the gematria, or Michael, excuse me. Michael is the gematria of 101. That's why. So now that explains everything. Now I understand. Okay.
No, because he's the angel of loving kindness.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
So why couldn't he just have another cup of wine? Where he was.
Because he's on the road.
He forgot.
So she knew he must come by.
Can't drink it dry.
Where's he going to get wine? He's traveling in the middle of nowhere.
How much can you drink?
He's in the middle of nowhere.
Okay, so
Any
you have
wine
another
with
cup of
him?
wine. You have a cup of wine here and be done with the shaving.
Yeah,
Basically.
I guess so.
I
Yeah.
always carry schnapps.
But he
Well, actually, no, it's too late because we said before if he went out on the road, it already interrupts.
already interrupted.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
She knew he
I thought after 7 it's okay. How do you get to 101 already?
No, it's okay in order to avoid the shade from attacking you, but once the shade has attacked you, then you're in trouble. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, this is all, the Rambam, who's a rationalist, says all of these Gemaras are based on superstition and there's no reality to them. But I've always taken the position of never make fun of someone who can turn you into a frog. And so I remain open to all contingencies. Okay, let's go weiter. Amar Meimer, Amar Li, Rishtinhi Dinashim Kashfanios. I was once conversing with the head witch of all the witches, and she told me as follows. Now, witchcraft is also something that needs to be contended with, and there's actually more danger from witches than there is from shadim. So you have to even be more watchful, because there are witches who can actually cast a hex on you and really do lots of damage. This is not the only Gemara that discusses it. This Gemara is in Avodah Zarah as well. Haiman depaga behu benashim kashfanios neimahachi. If a man bumps into a what's it called? A
Sorceress.
No, a group of witches. What do you call that? A coven. Beautiful. A coven of witches. If you happen across a coven of witches, you should say as follows: Hare chamimi b'dikula bazia lepumaychu nashi decharshaya. He says, behold, a basket, a porous basket that is filled with a dung should be poured into your mouth, O witchy women. Okay. Kereach korchaichi, parach porchaichi. May the hair that you use for incantational use fall out of your head, and may you fly away and fly far away from here and get away from me. And ivror tavinaichu, may the incense or spices that you use in order to practice witchcraft, may they be scattered out. And zika lemurika chadata denankisu nashim kashfanios. that, and may the wind blow away the new saffron that you hold on to perform your incantations and your hexes, O witches. Adichanani v'chananchi lo asisi legav. While I was being protected from heaven and I was watching over myself, I avoided bumping into you, coven of witches. But hashta da asisi legav korchanani v'chananchi. But now that I have recklessly bumped into you, then korchanani, then I have that compassion that they were supposed to have on me from Shemaim has been cooled off. And certainly, like the Rashbam explains, Hashta Shabasi Beinechem Yodiani Sheniskaru Alai Rachamechem, that I know that your compassion is not there for me to rely on. V'gam Rachamai Niskaru Shalochasti Alatzmi, and also I wasn't compassionate upon myself. Both you and me have been certainly are not going to be the providers of mercy, and therefore I have to hope for the best. And again, this is incantational, so I don't know that necessarily that we have to really try and give a dark drush as to what the deeper meaning is.
What does the Rambam do with all these conversations, though, that the Ryan, which I had with...
The Rambam says that these are all based on superstitions that existed at the time, and therefore these are words of advice that our sages give based upon...
actual conversations with the king of the Shadim and...
Perhaps have a deeper meaning.
Superstitions, but they actually have these conversations.
Yeah. So I don't know that the Rambam necessarily would addresses this Gemara directly. Perhaps he does, and I'm not aware of it. But I would agree with Mark that these Gemaras have metaphorical meaning as well, and it's not always easy to understand what the deeper meaning is. B'marava lo kapti azugi, that in the Eretz Yisrael people are not concerned about zugos. Rav Dimi minaharda kapid afilu arushma dechavisa, and Rav Dimi was just the opposite. He was overly concerned about zugos to the point where if there was a barrel of wine, he would make graduated marks on the sides of the barrel to measure and see how many cups of wine were left in this barrel. And if there would be an even number of cups, he would make sure to empty it out in cups so that there would always only be an odd number of cups left in the barrel. So Havavuvda Opaka Chavisa. And there was once a Maisa where he neglected to maintain an odd number. There was an even number of cups left in the barrel, and the barrel burst. Klala de Milson, the Gemara therefore tells us the general rule: Kol de kapid kapti bahadei, ude lo kapid lo kapti bahadei. That anyone who was worried about zugos, is worried about shadim, then he's got a lot to worry about, and meaning that he's more susceptible to injury. The less worried you are about shadim, the less you have to worry about their injury through zugos. And umihu l'mechash miboy. But nevertheless, even if you're not worried at all, you still have to take minimal precautions, and that's why we talked about even the most rational person should not drink zugos. Ki asa Rav Dimi Omar shtei beitzim ushtei agosim shtei kishuin v'davar acher halach l'moshe misinai. That there are really only 4 food items that if you consume them in pairs is a problem of zugos. The first is eggs, the second is nuts, the third is gourds, and the fourth one, we don't know what it is. And therefore, because the rabbis didn't know what that fourth food item was, they said all food items cannot be eaten in pairs. And furthermore, that which we said that over the course of generations, the power of Shadim has diminished such that if you have higher multiples of 2, you don't have to worry. That's only true with Shadim, you don't have to worry. But if you're in the presence of witches, then you do have to worry about even higher multiples of 2. That there was once a Maisa, that to illustrate this, there was a woman who her husband divorced her, and she was obviously, when you get divorced from your husband, you can be quite angry at your ex. And just ask me, I know plenty of cases. And so what happened was she goes and she remarries, but she remarries the shopkeeper who's in charge of selling wine. So kol yoma hava azil v'shasi chamra. So her ex used to show up at the store every day and get a glass of wine to drink. Hava ka'avdalek shafim v'lo kamahanya la Bay Mishum Dahava Mizdar Benafshe Bezuga. And she would always put a hex on the wine that he was drinking in the hopes of injuring him, but it didn't work because the guy was always careful to never drink an even number of cups. But Yom Echad Ishti Tuva V'lo Havayada Kamashasi. Ad Shitzer Havitzayil V'Yizdar Benafshe Mikan Ve'elach Lo Havitzayil V'lo Yizdar Benafshe. So one day, I guess he needed a lot to drink. So he wasn't that careful because he drank 16 cups of wine, and then at that point he lost count. Like Alan said, you don't feel anything at that point, right? So he was no longer careful. So afikte bezuga, and so he left, or she caused him to exit the store after having drunk an even number of cups. Ki hava azil gaspe ahutaya, as he was going on the road, a certain Arab peddler sees him walking down the road, probably walking not in a straight line. So Amarle Gavr Ketilahu da Azil Hacha. And the guy said, I see a man who's about to die. Because apparently the guy could tell that there were symptoms on this fellow that he had just been hexed. So Azil Chavti Ladikla, Tzavach Dikla, Upakahu. So that he went and grabbed hold of, I guess because he realized that he was in mortal danger and he felt weak, he grabbed hold of a tree, he let out a krechts, and I guess there's a little bit of a girsa change over here, or because it's also, you can be goris tzava dikla, which the Rashbam explains means the tree shriveled up because the guy with the hex had been holding on to the tree, upakahu, and the guy himself burst, and he died, I guess, as a result. So Amarav Iv Avira Ka'aros V'Kikaros Ein Bah Mishum Zugos Klala Demilsa Kol Shegamar B'Dei Adam Ein Bah Mishum Zugos Gamar B'Dei Shamayim B'Milei Minei Demechal Chayshinon. And the general rule is like this: that if you have a prepared food, such as a cooked food, like let's say a farina, or that is prepared or processed by human hands, or loaves of bread, those kinds of things you don't have to worry about zugos. Only things that are in their finished state through the hand of heaven, meaning that they grow in the way that they are served naturally, like an apple or a gourd or anything else like that, or eggs. Only that's a problem of zugos. So and chanus ein ba mishum zugos. Furthermore, if you drink in the store, if you drink in the shop, there's generally no problem of zugos, and that's only from shadim. But from witchcraft, like we just learned in the previous story, you do have to worry about zugos. And the reason is because the shade's not going to bother you if it's not your regular habitat. And nimlach ein ba mishum zugos. And also, if you change your mind and you drink one cup and you say, maybe I'll have another one, but you didn't set out initially to have 2 cups, that's also not a problem of zugos. And oreach ein bo mishum zugos, a guest who doesn't know how much wine they're bringing out, doesn't have to worry about zugos, because that's also like a nimlach, it's also like a guy changes his mind since he didn't set out initially to have that amount. And isha ein ba mishum zugos. And a woman also does not have to worry about zugos, because the shadim are not going to bother with just a woman. V'i isha chashuva chashina, but if she's an important woman, like the women in our world, so then, like the Ramah says this, all nashim are chashuvos. So then she has to worry about shadim, because the shadim are concerned about harming important people. Amar Rav Chinana Berei de Rabbi Yehoshua, Ispargos mitzaref letova ve'ein mitzaref l'ra. There's a drink called Ispargos. It's a therapeutic drink that is made from wine plus the extract of cabbage. What they would do is they would boil cabbage, extract the liquid, add wine to it, and it was a health elixir. And you would drink it in the morning, sort of like as a morning beverage. Now, the reason why it's not there's a problem, I guess, if you would drink it in zugos, that would be a problem. However, it's not a problem, says the Gemara, if you, let's say you have 1 cup of wine and then 1 cup of ispargos. The reason is because since its whole function is as a therapeutic drink, it cannot be, therefore, to bring any bad effects upon a person. So therefore, you can use it. If you've had 2 cups of wine, you can drink a cup of ispargos to obviate the problem of zugos, but you can never use ispargos to bring upon yourself the problem of zugos.
The guy before who had 16 plus cups of wine, I thought we said after 10 you're safe.
You're safe from shadim, but this is witchcraft. That was the whole point of the Gemara. The Gemara said that's only true with shadim, but not from witchcraft. Amar Ravina mishmei derava zugi l'chamra va'amri le zugi l'kula. Now Ravina says in the name of Rava that if a person is not sure whether how many cups he's had to drink, what should he do? So Ravina says, some say that what you're supposed to do is drink another cup l'chumra. And the reason that you're supposed to drink another cup of l'chumra is mimon avshach. You say like this: if I had 2 or if I had 10, whatever, and I want to, this will be my 11th cup. And if I really only had 9 cups, so then I'm not using this additional cup as an extra cup. I'm nimlach. I'm changing my mind and I'm making this a separate drinking. So either way, you're covering your bases. But others say, va'amri lezuga l'kula. Others say that no, you should not drink an extra cup because by showing that you're not concerned with zugos, by not drinking an extra cup, like we said before, someone who's not concerned about zugos has nothing to worry about. Amar Rav Yosef, trade the chamer v'chad the shichur lo mitzdaref, trade the shichur v'chad the chamer mitzdaref. Rav Yosef says if you had 2 cups of wine and you want to supplement it with a 3rd cup of beer, that doesn't work. That's not going to obviate the problem of zugos. But if you had 2 cups of beer and you want to tap it off with a 3rd cup of wine, that will help because wine is more chashuv than beer. So if you upgrade it with the 3rd cup, then that helps. But if you downgrade it with the 3rd cup, that doesn't help. V'simaneich. And the way to remember it is from a Mishnah in Kalim. It says, the Mishnah over there is talking about fabric, and it says that fabric, depending upon the quality of the fabric, will determine how large the piece of fabric must be in order to be makabel tumah, in order to become susceptible to tumah. And basically what it says is that if you have, let's say, a piece of fabric that's less than the requisite size for that quality of fabric, if you supplement it by stitching to it an additional piece of fabric that's more chashuv than the current fabric, so then that can supplement the shear. But let's say you supplement it with a piece of fabric that is inferior to this particular fabric, then it doesn't supplement to the requisite shear and it's still not going to be makabel tumah. That's the same thing between the difference between wine being supplemented by beer versus beer being supplemented by wine. Amar of Nachman, Amar Rav, Trey kama tak, Trey, and the Rashbam's gear says, Trey mikmei taka, v'chad ataka mitzdarfi. They used to bring out beverages on a tray. Let's say a guy drinks 1 cup of wine before they bring out the beverages on a tray, and then they bring out an additional 2 cups on the tray itself. So that's okay. That'll obviate the problem of zugos, because even though you're not drinking them on the same tray, one was before the tray was brought out, and the other 2 after they brought out the tray, they can be mitzdaref. But chad mikmei taka, tray mikmei taka, that's when they brought out 2 cups before the tray and 1 cup on the tray, that'll work, because the cup on the tray is considered to be more chashuv. But if they have chad mikmei taka u'trei ataka lo mitzdarfen, but if you have 1 before the tray is brought out and then 2 brought out on the tray, so then that's not going to work, because I guess
The 2 are a pair.
the 2 are a pair, and the one that was less chashuv is not going to be able to be mitzdarif to them. So maskef la Rav Misharshia atu anan l'tekuni taka kaba'in l'tekuni gavra ba'inan v'gavra kamiskin v'koi. So Rav Misharsh says, I don't understand why you would say that. I mean, after all, the issue over here is not remedying the tray. The issue is remedying the individual. What difference does it make if the drinks that he drank were on a tray or off a tray? And in both cases, he's consumed an odd number of beverages, and so therefore it shouldn't be a problem. And to kuli alma, trey ataka v'chad labasar taka lo mitzdarfi. But everyone agrees that if they brought out the beverages on a tray, and there was an even number, and then you added and drank another cup after the trays were already taken away, that's not going to help. Those 2 are not conjoinable. And I guess that's probably most comparable to the case of 2 cups of wine and 1 cup of beer being the supplement, because I guess the one that comes at the end is not as chashuv. That's my guess, although I could be mistaken in my interpretation. Ki ahu ma'isa de Rabbi bar Nachmani. The Gemara says we know this halacha to be true because there's a ma'isa that's brought in Bava Metzia that Rabbi bar Nachmani was very makbid that when he had a guest who drank an even number of cups that were brought out on a tray, he said that we need to bring out another cup on a tray also in order to obviate the problem of zugos. We can't bring it if it's not on a tray. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel Kol Hamazuk Mitzdarev Chutz Min Hamayim. That Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, let's say you have an even number of cups of wine, and you want to tap it off with an additional cup, but you don't want to drink wine. So he says, as long as the drink is diluted, meaning that it's a mixed beverage, mixed with different kinds of liquids, then that acts as a supplement to the wine. Just like wine is mazug, it's diluted with water, so too, any beverage that's diluted with water acts as a supplement to obviate the problem of zugos, except for diluted water. Now, what do we mean by diluted water? You take two different kinds of water and mix them together. That's also a similar kind of beverage which can obviate the problem of zugos. For Rabbi Yochanan Amar afilu mayim, and Rabbi Yochanan says even diluted water, where you take two different kinds of water and mix them together, that can act as to make up an odd supplement to an odd number of cups. Amar Rav Papalo Amran Ela Chamimi Lagav Kariri V'Kariri Lagav Chamimi Aval Chamimi Lagav Chamimi V'Kariri Lagav Kariri Lo. But even according to Rabbi Yochanan, who's Mekel, it's only when you mix two different kinds of water, where one water is cold and one is hot, or vice versa. In other words, you pour cold water into hot water into cold water. But if you just take two different containers of water and mix them together, and they're the same temperature, so their features are exactly the same, so that's not called a mixed beverage anymore, and therefore it cannot be used, even according to Rabbi Yochanan, as a supplement to your zugos. Have a wonderful day.